Hello, everybody, and welcome to week 2 edition of Stat Chasing. We have a really exciting week of football to discuss. A lot of really high wide receiver scoring from Stephon Diggs. Really highlighted the week with a 45-point performance, and a lot of interesting other situations at running back to discuss with some of the top players posting lower than expected scores. So yeah, it was an exciting week. Drico, how'd everything go for you in week 2 from a fantasy perspective?
Yeah, fun week for sure. I thought I had a sweat in DFS. Kind of ironic. I put that big post out like this is why I'm focusing on the battle royales now. And then I saw I had a bunch of tickets on DraftKings, and I entered them into the jukebox, which is about 150,000. I'm like, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. Just throw them in there. And then at points, I was in the top place for the jukebox.
Oh wow!
Couldn't pull it out. Had a couple. I think I had 3 scores above 220 points.
Wow!
But I won enough for a 6-pack of Bud Light in the end.
Yeah, that's who'd you have in those lineups?
And it was definitely stacking the Miami and Baltimore game.
Got it. Yeah, it seems like if you didn't have Tua to Waddle or Tua to Hill, or maybe even you needed both to take down those tournaments. But yeah, we also had a pretty insane sweat in our main event team. I know people don't want to hear about our leagues, but we were down 80 points going into Monday Night Football. Had Jalen Hurts and Stephon Diggs. They both went nuclear, and we ended up winning by just a handful of points, which was pretty exciting for Monday night. So yeah, a lot of crazy scores going up in general, as we'll get into as we go through the data here. But yeah, I think we can jump into it. Had a great reception from folks for week 1, so we'll largely stick to the same format that you may be familiar with now. And yeah. Drico, why don't we just get started with the quarterbacks here?
And just want to say good evening to you too, the Achievers.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in. And for those of you guys watching, we'll answer questions. We'll try to answer questions as we go through these, so feel free to chime in with comments and questions. So anyways, on the quarterback side, again, just to describe what we're looking at here, we have TD rate on the y-axis and adjusted yards per attempt on the x-axis, which is yards per attempt adjusted for interceptions and touchdowns. And the size of the bubbles here, again, is rushing yards to see which of the Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, Marcus Mariota's type pop out here. So with that said, I think I noticed a couple interesting things in this chart. Tua up there in the far right corner is one, but Drico, I'll kick it to you. Any big quarterback takeaways from this chart? Which and again, to be clear, this is looking at weeks 1 and 2 combined, so not just week 2, but both weeks 1 and 2. Any takeaways here?
Drico? Yeah, so I did want to start with a question that we got in the Discord. And it was essentially, how come Matt Ryan was so bad? It's an easy answer. He's obviously an older quarterback, but the big problem for him was that his best receiver in the game, his top targeted receiver in the game, was Ashton Dulin, who was a career punt gunner. So that obviously led to some predictable results. Or easy to call a predictive result after the fact.
Pittman being out definitely seems to have hurt him.
For sure. So some other takeaways I had was, so you can see just how poorly Kyler Murray performed there. He's kind of hidden away in this kind of cluster, Davis Mills, Marcus Mariota cluster.
You never want to be in the Davis Mills, Marcus Mariota cluster.
No, that's not where you want to be. And so, yeah, I did a little bit of digging on it, and it looks like they were relying on Hollywood Brown to in the alpha role. So he was like the top targeted receiver. He was getting like a 13 ADOT, which is like that's the kind of alpha ADOT, and just brutal results, absolutely brutal results. And it really does look like they're missing Nuke Hopkins an awful lot. Like, I guess there was some hope that Hollywood would be able to kind of like soak up those sort of targets in the early goings, but it does seem clear that's not the type of receiver that he is. And I guess with this being a kind of like eye on resurrection stuff, it's good to note that Nuke does come back in week 7. So that would be something that I would kind of look for a decent jump there for Kyler once Nuke comes back.
Yeah, I agree with that. With the resurrection, if Kyler's ADP is falling, I'm still buying there because, yeah, like you said, it doesn't start till week 6. They'll have Nuke back. I think, with Nuke back, that could put Marquise Brown into a more natural position as a field stretcher, secondary target, similar to what he played for the Ravens last year with Mark Andrews as the alpha target earner. I think that might be a more natural role for Marquise once Hopkins is back. And I think you could see this Cardinals offense start to click a little bit more. You'll have Rondale Moore hopefully healthy, Zach Ertz hopefully more healthy than he started off the year as, maybe Trey McBride coming on late. Certainly a poor start for Murray in the first 2 weeks, but I am not panicking, especially if his price starts to fall way behind the
so his ADP is still at 50. So
yep.
And I guess it does seem like people are holding off on the resurrection until we get more information, which I do think makes sense. But when Jalen Hurts is QB5 and going just so early, it does make an ADP of 50 more palatable. Like if Jalen Hurts is gonna pick 36, 52 doesn't sound too bad. But obviously you probably do want to look for a bit of a slide given the performances. But at the same time, I think it's important not to forget how volatile fantasy football can be and how volatile just production can be. Because if you were to look at the Kyler Murray's and the Cardinals offensive performance at the start of last year, it was gangbusters. They could do no wrong. They were in shootout. Either they were in shootouts or they were just scoring so many points on the opponent that the other side couldn't keep up. So I guess I just wouldn't forget about that just because they've had this kind of like per result to start the season.
Yep, I'm totally on board there. I think huge games are still definitely within Kyler's range of outcomes. I think, Drico, we can touch on a little bit is maybe quarterbacks on the, low-end QB1, high-end QB2 border, because there are a lot of teams out there that are going to lose Dak, or that have lost Dak, that have lost Trey Lance to injuries for a good stretch. Do you have any preference? Let me throw out 4 names to you of guys that have outperformed early season expectations a little bit. Kind of a handful of pocket passers here in Tua, Jared Goff, Carson Wentz, and Trevor Lawrence. For me, I like Goff quite a bit. I think he would be my preference there. The Lions, but it's not shown on this chart, but
you mean at cost, right?
Yeah, sorry, at cost. I'm talking sort of ADP for best ball resurrection. Important to make that clear. I think at cost, Jared Goff still goes, I believe, in the 180s. The Lions have one of the highest pass rates over expectation of any team in the league so far. And I think the Lions' weapons are still underrated in terms of how the general public perceives them. I think people are finally catching on to Amon-Ra St. Brown. He's way up there. Obviously, Swift is way up there. But their secondary guys, Jameson Williams, DJ Chark, TJ Hawkinson, Jamal Williams, they have a bunch of good players here on offense. And I think similar to what you saw with Jared Goff in LA back in the day, when he's surrounded by playmakers, he can effectively lead an offense and put up some pretty big spike weeks in fantasy. It also looks like the Lions defense is going to continue to be a weak point
Terrible.
for them. So it's a team that's throwing a lot. It's got good weapons with a bad defense. I'm pretty bullish on Lion stacks, even at the elevated prices for Amon-Ra and Swift right now.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So it looks like Goff has moved up a little bit. He's moved up to 155.
Okay. Gotcha.
But still, like for the type of performances that you've been getting, that is still really, really strong. And I think as well, there's been like comments that like he still looks like Goff. It's not like he's transformed into this other like being out of nowhere, and he's just destined for some kind of regression. He's still playing like Jared Goff. He's just kind of been dragged along by really, really strong weapons.
Yep. Yeah, I agree with that as well. I think he's, a system quarterback, and when the system is good, and I think it is right now, I'm buying into the Lions. I think he can be good. But yeah, let's maybe move on to running backs here. I think that was a good discussion on the quarterbacks. So here, again, for running backs, we're looking at workload here on this chart versus efficiency. That's how to think about it at a high level. So on the y-axis, we have receiving expected fantasy points per game. The x-axis is rushing fantasy points per game. Add those two together, and you have a good sense of the opportunity that each individual running back is getting in their respective offenses. Also, you can see on the chart, the size of the bubble is fantasy points over expected. So someone like DeAndre Swift, who's ripping off massive runs on a fairly light workload, you see him have sort of a huge bubble here. Whereas someone like Joe Mixon, who is more or less just surviving on a massive workload, but not showing any great efficiency, has a really small bubble here. So that's sort of the overview of the chart. What's shown here, just to be clear, is just running backs with more than 10 or sort of around 10 or more expected fantasy points per game, which is a group of about 30 or so running backs. So Drico, anything from a workload perspective that jumped out to you in week one on the running backs?
So I guess one thing that helped me understand this chart a little bit better, those diagonal lines, if they're to the right of those lines, essentially that Josh Jacobs, you can see, has more than 10 expected points per game.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. You probably did say that.
No, that's a good point. Yeah, those different ranges, you can see that they're sort of color coded, but that's a good way to think about it. So on the far right side there, those are the guys with the biggest workloads. They're to the right of sort of a line that would connect 20 to 20 if we really had a big enough chart. So that means that Barkley, Mixon, Antonio Gibson are all in this elite workload range of more than 20 expected fantasy points per game. But yeah, that's a good thing to point out, Drico. I'll let you continue.
So honestly, to start off with the kind of like the backs with the big expected point workloads, Joe Mixon is honestly one of the most intriguing for me in that he's got so many expected points, and he has got such a high percentage of the expected points. He's got 84% of the expected points for the Bengals. And just for comparison, Saquon has the highest percentage at 93%. So that's not only is he getting volume, he's getting a really high percentage of the volume. And a big part of that is just how many plays the Bengals are running. Mm-hmm. But the I guess even with some kind of regression on the play volume, and if they have like a more normal play volume, he's still got this huge workload. And a big part of the kind of undershoot or say underperformance on the fantasy points is just he hasn't converted the touchdowns that he would be expected to. So he's at about minus 14 expected points, and about 8 of that is just from touchdowns. And honestly, Sam, it's a difficult one for me because he's going at the 2-3 turn, which it seems kind of palatable, but at the same time, I don't know how. I've never been a Joe Mixon drafter. He's never been that interesting for me. But at the same time, if he keeps up that percentage and he doesn't get hurt, it's almost inevitable that he has another big year.
Yeah, I am definitely more bullish on Mixon than when I started the year. And it's interesting that his ADP has actually fallen slightly compared to his sort of preseason ADP. And I think the biggest thing that jumps out is the receiving usage.
Right.
He's still not playing all the third downs. Piron's still getting a lot of that work, but they target him heavily on first and second down. And, part of that, my guess, is that their O-line has been such a disaster that Burrow is not able to get the ball deep to Higgins and Chase, and he's forced into a lot more checkdowns to Mixon. You're also seeing Hurst's usage pretty strong as well from that perspective. So, we'll see if that sticks, but at an ADP of around 20 right now in Best Ball Resurrection, I'm not super excited by the talent for Mixon, but the role looks really good. And running back is really thinned out. Derrick Henry is fallen off a cliff. It looks like Alvin Kamara's workload is way down. Najee Harris has this injury scare combined with a lower workload than expected. Like, a lot is looking down for some of the top running backs. For Mixon, things are looking up. And if it's sort of a scarcity thing at running back at the top this year, then Mixon seems pretty good to me in the late second once all of those elite wide receivers are off the board.
I think it's interesting as well that there was a lot of conversation this year over whether all the wide receivers were being drafted too high and all of the situation downgrades for the wide receivers. But I don't think there was a lot of conversation about maybe the situations aren't that great for the running backs either. Like, we had like a huge amount of over 26, 27, 28-year-old running backs in the first and second round. Obviously, committees are becoming more and more kind of prominent, and the kind of Uber back type that we've seen is less prevalent. And I guess it is interesting that Joe Mixon is only 26. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't feel like he should be only 26, but that's almost an advantage, I think, when you see he's been kind of drafted alongside Derrick Henry.
Yeah. And I think that will get updated as more people draft in the Best Ball Resurrection. I think Mixon's ADP will creep up, but yeah, I think in that late second range, I'm definitely buying. I think other sort of things I wanted to touch on in this chart. James Robinson's workload is really good for where you drafted him. He's in that 10 to 15 expected point range, just to the left of Jonathan Taylor, if you're looking at the chart. And he's clearly ahead of ETN right now. And look, I think that will balance out as the season goes on. But in terms of just a winner versus ADP, James Robinson is honestly someone I had none of. I was not buying the recovery from the Achilles. I think I might have to change that in future years, just given how many of these guys are coming back so quickly from the Achilles and the ACLs. I mean, we'll see how it plays out in the full season, but just fully fading a guy because of an injury was maybe not smart on my point, given what he had shown in his past.
I think as well, what's interesting about James Robinson is not only is he getting workload, he's playing well.
Yep.
He's getting a positive or in some ways he's getting a positive fantasy point over expected. He is scoring touchdowns, he is rushing for yards, and that's the sort of thing that kind of demands more usage. And he is a player who we know to be a really good running back. He is a good running back. And I think that if you drafted ETN, which I did when he was in the 4th and 5th round, earlier in the offseason, that's a little. It's almost. I think you're almost getting a little bit squeezed there by just how good James Robinson is playing, and I guess the one positive for ETN is that they're the only 2 running backs that get use. That's the one kind of like you're not going to get. I think you're barring another injury to James Robinson, which we don't want to see. You're going to be thoroughly disappointed with ETN, but the one saving grace is they've only got 2, so it's only getting split up 2 different ways.
Yeah, no, that's true, and I think ETN, I think he will continue to get more involved. It's also a team where outside of Christian Kirk, they're really running out some questionable talent at wide receiver with Marvin Jones, Zay Jones, Jamal Agnew's getting snaps. It's an offense where you could see a lot of the targets go to the running back and tight end. So, ETN, he was not a good pick in the 3rd round, but I don't think you're dead there.
No.
And the offense looks decent so far that, there's still outs for ETN, maybe with the James Robinson injury. But I think before the season, people were thinking that ETN could fully dust Robinson. I don't think his role is going away. He looks good. He's played well before in that offense. I think he's going to continue to maintain a decent size role there.
Yeah, and that is a good point that probably the best players in the offense are James Robinson and ETN, which helps both of them, really, I think.
Yeah, agreed.
My love note to Antonio Gibson, it didn't pay off in week 2, but what was interesting is that he still maintained that kind of double expected point workload. And I guess the roots were close to 50-50 with McKissick, but I still think that if he's getting at least half the receiving workload for the Commanders, I guess I'm feeling a little peevish about maybe he should be going in the 4th round, but it does seem like there is still a very talented player, and I'm still hopeful that he breaks off some big plays to make me look a little smarter.
Yeah, and he has a lot of room to regress. I think we probably weren't expecting him to maintain that double-double for the whole season, but he could, at his cost, he could regress pretty far on this chart from a workload perspective and still be worth his value in the 60s. His workload is far exceeding that of the guys going in his range currently. So I still like him. He's going this, 63 right now, right around ETN, around Zeke, around Kareem Hunt, around J.K. Dobbins. There's risk there, but all those guys are super risky, right? And I still like Gibson at that cost if you spend a bunch of early round picks on wide receiver and you need a running back with some upside down the stretch.
And he really hasn't moved up that much.
No.
I think when we last looked at this, he was going around 67. Now he's going to pick 63.
Mm-hmm.
That's that is still you have a lot of room for error and a lot of room for that to really smash too.
Agreed. So I'm going to move to the next running back chart here that shows running backs with less than 10 or so expected points per game, just so we could visualize it better. But before we do that, I do want to call into attention where Tony Pollard is on this chart. He's right around.
He's on the chart this week, is he?
He made it on the chart this week at 10 expected points per game. But who you do not see on this chart is Ezekiel Elliott, who is actually on the next chart at you'll see him sort of in the middle to the right side in the yellow band on this chart at less than 10 expected points per week. So this is not something I'm hearing people talking about, but based on usage in weeks 1 and 2, Pollard has actually flipped Zeke in terms of usage. Now that is heavily driven by receiving usage and targets. Zeke is still maintaining a higher snap share, getting more rushes, but Pollard is seeing a much bigger receiving role. He was given a goal line touch last week at the 1 yard line. He had a big catch and they looked to him on the 1 yard line to punch it in. He got it done. I don't think he's going to steal the goal line role from Zeke. I think that was maybe a little bit of a fluke, but I do think that, if the Cowboys offense can get better, I think we're going to see closer to a 50-50 split than what we've seen in years past with Zeke and Pollard. I think Zeke looks quite bad in these games, and if the Cowboys have really any chance of winning games, they're going to be looking to get Pollard more involved. The last point I'll add there is the wide receiver corps is just a disaster now. Noah Brown's becoming a target hog somehow. Dalton Schultz is injured with a PCL injury. Who knows on Gallup? But they're trotting out a really, really weak wide receiver core. Dennis Houston, I think, is getting snaps. No idea who he is. So there's room in this offense for a running back to get a higher target share than we might expect, just based on the offense. So, yeah, any thoughts there on the Pollard Zeke split?
I think you sufficiently danced on the grave of Zeke there.
Cool. Well, yeah, I'll kick it to you then. Yeah, it's a fun, based on my preseason shares of Zeke. I'm very happy to do that dance.
I do want to point out that based on workload, Javonte is firmly ahead now of Melvin Gordon. I think it was somewhere around 15 to 5 expected points last week, somewhere around that range. And that if you were drafting Javonte at the 2-3 turn, it's a really nice outcome. I do think though that and obviously fantasy football efficiency is super volatile. He does have to start playing better to keep Melvin Gordon off the field, but it's definitely it's a very notable development, I think.
Yeah, agreed. And I think, I'm still in this from people who watch more film than me, but you hear people say Javonte looks way more explosive, way more likely to rip off a big run, but Gordon is still better at finding the hole, grinding out those 6-7 yard runs where maybe Javonte misses where the play is going a little bit. So you can see that in the chart here. Melvin is showing as a bit more efficient through the first 2 weeks, but I don't think that's likely to hold just based on their trajectory. I think Javonte will be more efficient than Gordon in the long run, but hey, Gordon's still a good player. If you drafted Gordon at his cost, I think that's a win. He has a solid role as an RB2 in this offense for sure.
So just I guess to clarify on my stat here, in week 2, Javonte was about 14.5 expected points, while Melvin Gordon was 6.5. So I guess that's just to clarify why that might look different to the chart. So we actually got a question in from Pete about the Arizona what the hell happened once James Conner came down, and
it's not good for you now, unfortunately.
Right, it's not great. So, but if you look at the workload overall, it was closer to 50-50. It was pretty the one thing that the two things that kind of pushed the mentor ahead. So he got a little bit more work in the red zone. So you got about 4 opportunities versus 2 for Eno, and then 2 inside the 10. It was 2 for the mentor, 1 for Eno, and then Williams also had the 30-yard run, which obviously was pretty nice for his usage. So I guess it's scant consolation prize that they were closer to 50-50, but it wasn't like James Conner went down and then Eno is still the backup. I guess it was close to 50-50, but still not great when James Conner goes down and still is he doesn't have the contingent value that we thought, but he does seem to have some solid standalone value.
Yeah, I agree with that. It was a bit of a different story in week 1. It looked like Eno was clearly ahead there, but clearly the Cardinals will play it a little bit differently once James Conner actually goes down, as we saw last week. But again, I'm adding both of these guys. If we're talking managed season long, I'm taking stabs at both. I think I would slightly prioritize the mentor over Eno, but it's close. I wouldn't pay a big price difference there in terms of fab. I think they're both solid speculative ads, and maybe you get 1 or 2 starts out of them. One thing I wanted to talk about in this chart here, Drico, was TDP's rushing workload. We have on the bottom of this chart here, you can see a couple of just pure 2-down grinders and Tyler Algier and Tyrion Davis-Price, who are getting 0 receiving work, but pretty heavy rushing game workloads. For TDP, I think this is interesting because he has a high ankle sprain now. I'd expect him to be out 4 to 6 weeks or so. That's generally what you see with this injury. So there's a pretty big rushing workload there. Also, keep in mind, Trey Lance is down. That's additional rushing workload that's going to go to someone. I think this Jeff Wilson role, just by default, because there's no one else there, could start to get quite big. And I'm also taking stabs on both Marlon Mack and Jordan Mason as the RB2 there. With both Mitchell and TDP out for a long stretch, I think there's going to be 2 running backs that have value here. So it's a matter of just spray and pray with San Francisco and hope you land someone that gets part of this rushing workload.
So just want to say appreciate you, Casey. Appreciate it. So yeah, I always have a tough time with these kind of pure rushing grinder type backs, because obviously we use predominantly kind of like either hero or 0 RB, where you are just trying to bank some cheap points at running back. I guess because, and it's probably because a lot of what I play is kind of just tournaments. The guys that are those pure rushing down grinders, it does, unless you get a kind of like Elijah Mitchell situation where they just dust everyone else, they add a receiving profile. It does seem like it's hard for them to be the guys that can really push you over the top in, let's say, a shootout in the main event or any other kind of tournament. Mm-hmm. But they are definitely useful. They're all useful pieces in just trying to get some points on your starting lineup as you try and unearth the next Elijah Mitchell or James Robinson or whoever it is that can get you a 15 to 20 point week with some regularity. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I think I agree. I don't think these guys have the ceiling in a GPP. You know, Jeff Wilson, depends what he's priced at. He could maybe get you there as sort of a chalk play that you need at a cheap price. But I imagine he gets priced up now. Yeah, I'm more talking waivers and the main event and deep leagues.
Right. And I wasn't really, I didn't really mean in DFS, because obviously if a running back is 5K and they're a certain running back, they can obviously get there. But just in terms of, like, let's say you're doing a shootout in the main event and you want 20 points, it does feel harder for those guys to get that.
Yeah, I agree. Probably lower upside because of that. I mean, San Francisco is just such a unique situation where I've almost learned to treat it differently than almost any other running back situation in the NFL, where there's just insane rushing workloads for these guys. They're not going to catch a ton of passes, but they can, if one of them does consolidate the workload, Wilson's the best bet right now. He's had big multi-TD rushing games in the past, ripped off some long runs. So yeah, I think if you find the starter, they can get you there. The backup, not so much, but it's just to get you, one man away from maybe getting that starter if Wilson goes down. But I totally hear what you're saying on the sort of the capped upside for that role in itself. So any other points here on the running backs you wanted to hit on?
Yeah. So one thing that I thought was interesting was last night. the gap between Dalvin, Cook, and Mattison. So this doesn't show up in the kind of like 2-week average, but it was a lot closer to a 60-40 split for Dalvin and Mattison last night. And if you were drafting Dalvin Cook in the first round on the idea that he was going to be an 80 to 90% share guy every game, that's I think that's got to be a little bit alarming.
Oh yeah,
and promising for Mattison drafters as well, especially with some of the FUD that came through in the offseason. So it's hard to know where the kind of like true average split is going to lie. Maybe Mattison played more last night because of game script or something like that, whereas Cook played more in against Green Bay because they were winning so much. But if now you're introducing this kind of snap volatility for the two of them, where either of them can be game scripted down to a 60% workload, that's very different to what we're used to from them two.
Yeah, I agree with that. I wonder if part of it was last night, it really got into pure sort of blowout territory, and maybe that was why you saw Mattison play more. But even without that, Cook does not seem to have as big of a stranglehold on this role as we expected. And Mattison is maybe a little bit more usable as a flex punt play than we thought if he's going to get a decent share of the work there. But, the Vikings, I think there'll be better days ahead for the Vikings. I think something about Kirk Cousins on primetime, it's like a meme, but it's so true. He can't get it done in primetime, and that offense really collapsed. Drico, we did have one question in the Discord from Hassan on the Seattle running back situation. He asked, can we trust any running back in Seattle? Oh, man, this is so disgusting. Travis Homer doesn't even appear here, but I think led the team in snaps. God. I think my answer is no.
I think that's the key. Like, you're never going to be. I don't think you're ever going to be excited to play any of these guys. We started Rashad Penny last week, and we're really hoping to not ever have to do it. At this point, for now, we're really hoping to not have to do that anytime soon. I think that the hardest thing is that it's just such a full-blown committee that you've got multiple guys that are going to share the rushing workload, and there's not going to be a whole lot of rushing touchdowns. You've got Travis Homer, who's the third down guy, but how valuable is Geno Smith's third down check down guy? It doesn't seem to be that valuable.
No, it's definitely not. And, if I was really to force myself to pin an upside scenario for one of these guys, I think you do want Kenneth Walker over anyone in this group. He did, he's not expected to have much of a receiving role coming into the NFL. He did show up here with close to 5 receiving expected fantasy points per game. So perhaps there's a world where they dust Homer and DJ Dallas and these guys, and they commit to Walker in the third down role. I don't think that's likely, but I think it's possible. Look, they spent a second-round pick on this guy. I think he's more likely to have that role than Penny, given Penny had something insane like 2 targets last year, in 10 games played or whatever. He's just an absolute zero in how they want to use him in the pass game. So I think Walker has more upside to capture that pass down role. And maybe we see a situation like with the Jets backs, where it's running backs on this terrible team that are throwing a lot. Maybe Walker can sort of, accumulate targets in that scenario, but we need Homer to get out of the way first. And as of right now, that's not going to happen, unfortunately.
And I guess that the one kind of like shining beacon of hope is that there has been games where Rashad Penny just goes nuclear on efficiency, of where he gets these 6 to 7 yards per carry games, and all the stuff we're talking about doesn't matter because he's just playing so well. And Kenneth Walker was so good as a rusher in college that it's really not difficult to envision him having those games either. But for now, you can't start them really, right?
No, you can't start them with confidence. It's a prayer if you put them into your RB2, which unfortunately I will probably be praying to Pete Carroll in some leagues next week where I'm forced to start Rashad Penny. Last thing I wanted to touch on here at running back is CEH. He has the biggest fantasy points over expected on this chart. I would have to double check, but I think perhaps even the biggest, maybe only to Chubb and DeAndre Swift out of all running backs through 2 weeks. So, I was doing a Best Ball Resurrection draft today, and I saw CEH is ADP going in the 40s, and I am almost fully fading him there. I think, if
he's
you
number
drafted him,
3 overall, he's number 3 in fantasy points over expected.
Number
sorry.
3. Yeah. Good. Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. Thanks for double checking that. Yeah.
That was just week 2.
Okay.
No bad.
No, it's all good. But I think it's something close to that. I think he's top 5 in fantasy points over expected. He does not have the goal line role locked down. We've seen both McKinnon and Pacheco get goal line touches. McKinnon is still quite
overall as well.
Number 3 overall. Gotcha. McKinnon is still quite involved as a receiver. And I think Pacheco, as a rookie, his role could grow throughout the year. So, CEH, you drafted him at pick 80 to 100 in the preseason. You're loving that. You got a pretty good value there. He's going to pop up for spike weeks. But at an ADP in the 40s, I am most likely taking a wide receiver there. I think that's far too rich based on what his role has been so far. And I think the market is overreacting to some extreme efficiency so far from CEH, which based on what we know about him as a talent through the first 2 years in the NFL, I am highly betting that efficiency does not hold throughout the year.
Yeah, and it's almost like the running back, the starting running back role for the Chiefs is valuable in that you get to play with Mahomes. Andy Reid is this great offensive mind that where it can create the efficiency for probably subpar talent. But like you said, if you drafted him in the 100s, and after last year where he just looked so bad, and every other running back they brought in looked miles better than him, the fact that he is playing well has to be encouraging. But at an ADP of 40, like that, to me, that is an unpalatable price.
No, you're getting just way too light of a workload there. Anyways, let's move on to the wide receiver position. So looking at this chart here, for those who tuned in last week, we have slightly changed up how we're going to look at wide receivers. On the y-axis here, we have fantasy points per game going up the top. And then on the x-axis, same as last week, we have weighted targets per route run. For those who are unfamiliar with weighted targets per route run, it is a stat that factors in targets per route run, but adjusts it for air yards. So a target 50 yards down the field is worth more than a screen pass. So looking at this chart here, I think an interesting way to read it is I sort of broke up this chart into 4 segments. We have in the top right corner, those are guys with high weighted targets per route runs and high fantasy points per game. So these are guys with big roles that are performing. In the bottom right, we have what I call buy lows. These are guys with big opportunities, big weighted targets per route run, but have not shown much of a fantasy point ceiling so far. And then on the left-hand side, we have guys who have lower roles. And in the top there, guys with lower roles that are scoring a lot of points. That might be a signal that you might want to sell some of these guys high. And then in the bottom left quadrant, I just call these guys cardio specialists. They're not getting much opportunity. They're running a lot of routes, and they're not really scoring points. So we're going to start with the wide receivers here who have ran more than higher than 90% of routes run of their team's dropbacks. So these are guys that are running almost every single route. So with that said, Drico, I'll kick it to you. Anything jump out here through 2 weeks perhaps someone whose role looks a lot better than you expected going into the season?
So, I guess the one thing that is kind of striking, and probably a big part of it, is Judy's injury. Courtland Sutton had that. Courtland Sutton had that really strong opportunity, and I guess Jerry Jeudy made Russell Wilson look good last week, and Courtland Sutton made him look good for a play this week. So I do think that's interesting that after a week where the wide receivers weren't really involved for Denver, that Courtland Sutton kind of like jumps back up. I am a little bit surprised that Christian Kirk has been able to kind of like be kind of firmly in that strong performer quadrant, because he always kind of seemed to me to be more alongside the what's his name, Hollywood Brown sort of like type of player. So the fact that he is getting that type of target share and performing with it is obviously super bullish for him.
And super interesting for Kirk. Yeah, you almost wonder if
too.
Yeah.
What? Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, you almost wonder on Kirk if this Kingsbury system is so bad that once players get out of it, they look even better. Maybe for those who have dynasty shares of Rondale Moore, that's some false hope to hold on to. But I was shocked by that with Kirk too. He's not a guy I think of as a high target earner, over 20 fantasy points per game so far, but his role looks really good. He's not going to maintain this efficiency. That would be insane. But I think obviously you're pumped with where you took him. Sorry to cut you off, Drico. I don't know if you had other
No, you are good. So I think that it's interesting. Jahan Dotson as a kind of sell high. Now with these kind of high performing rookies, it can be tricky to put a sell high notice on them, just because they have so much. They can often have so much room to grow, but the fact that he's running this really high for a rookie route share, not getting great targets, but has put up the points, does kind of like that does sort of scream as a regression candidate.
He
does. Maybe get over a ski when he in excitement for him is maybe we need to see a little bit more before we truly get excited. Just because he's not earning targets at the rate that we would want to see to get excited for a rookie.
Yeah, that's a good point. He is not earning the targets, but he has been super efficient when he has been targeted. So, on the sell high thing, I think that's sort of just a general way to think about it. But I think it's important to consider the context of each player, right? And Dotson as a first round rookie who, when some of these first round rookies like, George Pickens have done absolutely nothing on the field and getting a lot of snaps, I'm still excited by the fact that he is scoring touchdowns. He is producing when he's out there. He's made some highlight reel catches. It's not the profile of someone I am extremely excited about. I'm not taking him over Drake London now in Dynasty. I'm not taking him over Garrett Wilson. Obviously those guys have flashed a lot more, but I think it's still promising, again, relative to his cost. But currently he's going 80, I think in the low 80s on the Best Ball Resurrection.
The other thing is his yards per out run is just 6.
1.6.
1.06.
Yeah. Okay.
So I guess he's not earning targets, and even if he and that is kind of like an ADOT adjusted target metric, and he's not getting yardage, but he has had touchdown efficiency. Now again, like we were talking, he's a rookie, and there's room for rookies to grow. But I did want to make that point.
No, I think it's a good one that if, don't expect the insane TD rate for Jahan Dotson to continue. One thing I wanted to call out here, and we've slandered CeeDee Lamb a lot on the show last week. I think I'm actually back in on CeeDee Lamb in the mid to high 30s. That's where I got him in the best ball resurrection draft today. Look, his role is still pretty massive, and we've made this argument before with the target competition, but again, I'll restate it. The wide receivers there that they're trotting out, Noah Brown, Dennis Houston, just no-name guys. Dalton Schultz now looks like he's going to miss some time. I think CD almost has to get more efficient and score more points based on the target share he's getting. And again, I think part of the discount you're getting on him now is the fact that Dak is injured. But in the best ball resurrection, Dak will be back for the playoffs, should be back for a good chunk of the regular season, I think. So I was totally fading CD at the 1-2 turn this year. I think it was so clear that there was just better wide receivers available. But once you get into the mid 30s, you can't find many guys with roles from a target earning perspective that look as good as CeeDee Lamb. So, I even think that price could continue to drop. So maybe you want to wait a little bit and see if you can get even a better price. But his role just looks really good from a target earning perspective.
One note on the resurrection. So the scoring starts in week 6, and Jerry Jones just came out today, and obviously wildly optimistic. He said Dak could play in week 4. He's not going to play in week 4, but if you, I guess, if he came back in week 6 or 7, you're obviously feeling very good about round 3 or 4 CeeDee Lamb, right?
Yeah, I agree. Any thoughts here? Maybe to cover up Amari's name for Sean. I think what the Achievers is pointing out is maybe we do need to talk about Amari Cooper a little bit. He is flashing quite a big role, and like the point we made with Dak for CD, there's the same narrative with Amari where Deshaun Watson is going to be back, week 12, I believe it is, and for the playoff stretch in best ball. Amari, he had a really bad week 1 and then a really good week 2. I can't say I watched the games to exactly know why, but any thoughts on Amari and his price right now in best ball drafts?
So he's still going at pick 77. Oof, so right around Brandon
I'm buying that. Damn.
He's going ahead of names like Curtis Samuel is up to 83. He's going ahead of Elijah Moore, Devonta Smith, going ahead of Garrett Wilson, Treylon Burks. I think that at that the price does make it difficult. The price is definitely it's low enough that it's interesting. Amari Cooper, the player, is always just really hard to get excited about because he's just never been elite. And when I think about these kind of tournaments, I really do want to be getting the guys who could be getting 25 points week after week in the playoffs. Not maybe guaranteed to do it, but have the potential to do it. And even with Watson back, it is really hard for me to imagine that for Amari. But the price there does make it interesting in that you can still pick plenty of high upside guys before him and still get some strong weeks out of him. I guess. Yeah. It's probably not going to be a name that I click too often. But I certainly see the case.
That's fair. I think it's a name. I think we maybe slightly disagree there. I think it's 77. Some of the wide receivers you listed after him, I think those guys' price will go up. Guys like Wilson, right, etc. I don't think I'm taking Cooper over some of those guys, but I think Cooper will ultimately fall in a range where he's cheap enough. And again, that wide receiver room in Cleveland is just trash right now. It's horrific. Deshaun coming back. Deshaun is super cheap. I hate drafting Deshaun. It feels gross, but he is really cheap. And especially in this tournament when, it starts in week 6. Him being out for those 6 weeks does not hurt you that much. And his price, I don't think, has moved up enough to reflect the difference from when you draft him and need him to start, weeks 1 through 6, since those points don't count anymore. I think Deshaun is way too cheap, but I don't want to tout Deshaun Watson anymore. It just feels disgusting. I think other quick guys, we'll move on to the other chart just for folks listening on audio. Names that are having incredible roles so far: Amon-Ra St. Brown, Cooper Kupp, Justin Jefferson, Devontae Adams, A.J. Brown, Jamar Chase, Christian Kirk. I think those are pretty obvious, but you should be really happy if you have those guys. Guys that are running a ton of routes and not performing: Allen Robinson, Devonta Smith, George Pickens, Adam Thielen, Elijah Moore, Darnell Mooney. I don't think by any means those guys are dead, and we don't have enough time to talk about each of them individually, but there are definitely warning signs there for those guys. Just wanted to highlight that before we move on to the next chart, which is going to show wide receivers, the same chart, but now wide receivers running 70 to 90% of routes. So these are close to full-time players, but for whatever reason, they're running slightly less routes than 90% plus. They could be slot players. This could be just skewed by teams that have been in blowouts, so they're resting guys. I think that explains some of the guys on this list. But anyways, same chart for guys in the 70 to 90% routes run range. Drico, I'll kick it to you. Who stands out on this chart for the wide receivers running to 70 to 90% of routes?
So I think we're into the range now where the kind of breakout profile wide receivers, rookie wide receivers start to get, I guess, start to be more prominent. Drake London there earning just a huge amount of targets and huge target share, and doing that when he's not even he's in that 80 to 85% route range. So you have the potential for, like, let's say a 10% bump. So that's the potential for even more targets if he becomes more of a full-time player. The Olave stuff, I don't know if you saw all the stuff on Twitter that he I think he had like 300 air yards.
I think it was 346, something insane like that.
Just a crazy amount of air yards. That's
per air yards, perhaps, but at least 150 of those were real air yards. Probably 200 per air yards mixed in there, though.
That's still, like, for a rookie, that is a great kind of opportunity.
Yeah, I guess totally agree.
On the more negative side, so we were very interested in Curtis Samuel last week, and obviously he paid dividends again. But I do think it's interesting hearing that he is in the that he scored so many points, but the target share isn't quite strong enough that the amount of points, it doesn't quite justify the amount of points he's scoring.
Yeah, I think with Samuel, what's interesting is maybe the target share is okay, but again, we're looking at weighted targets per route run. I think what Samuel is really hurt by here is an extremely low ADOT. I believe he has a less than 5 ADOT. I could pull up the numbers on that, but he is being used as an extreme short area sort of scheme touch target. Now, if that, sell high, let's think about what sell high means. If you can get someone who's expecting Curtis Samuel to score 20 plus points a game the rest of the year, sure, you can sell him high. I do think he has a pretty solid role in this offense, and I still think the market is not going to be buying Curtis Samuel. He's now going in the 80s, I believe, on Underdog Best Ball Resurrection. Again, I'm still
quick. Yeah. Amari Cooper or Curtis Samuel?
I'm taking Amari Cooper. I think he has higher potential to be sort of a target hog and have big spike weeks down the stretch. But I think that's close for me. I'm still taking Samuel over Mooney. I'm taking Samuel over Dotson, over Ayuk, over Thielen for guys in that range. Yeah, but I think the point you made on London is a good one. That stood out to me a lot when looking at this chart. I also think that both him and Bateman are interesting in that they're in the set. London's in the 80 to 85% of routes run. Bateman's just in the 70 to 80% of routes run. But both of them are commanding huge target shares, huge weighted target shares on those routes. So they maybe even have more hidden upside. I've seen some concerns about Bateman because he's not really been a full-time player in the traditional wide receiver one sense. But given what he's earning when he is on the field, I'm still pretty excited about him. And I think there's a world where we get to week 6 and they're cutting down the routes for Prochet and Tylan Wallace and Duvernay a little bit and all these sort of secondary guys. And Bateman could see an even
He's just playing so well that
yeah.
Can you really project Bateman for it to be a 70 to 80% route share guy when he's playing this well?
Yeah, I agree. Maybe a name here that I want to talk about on the buy low side that I think is the most interesting. It is not Equanimous St. Brown. I should have redacted him from this chart. It's Sterling Shepard. I think we should be excited about Shepard. Similar to James Robinson, he looks good coming off the torn Achilles. We've actually seen wide receivers do better off the torn Achilles than running backs in years past. We've seen Emmanuel Sanders come back and still be pretty good from that. Blanking other names right now, but I know it has a higher hit rate for wide receivers than running backs. And Shepard's been really good. He's been someone that I know Matt Harmon at Reception Perception has really liked. He's shown a target earning potential in the NFL, and he's right now earning the most targets on the Giants at just an 80 to 85% route rate. So maybe if they feel more comfortable with him down the stretch, he could increase that route rate. And as long as they don't trust Kadarius Toney, these other wide receivers are charting out there: Richie James, Kenny Golladay, David Stills. It's a bunch of no names, and I think
I saw that Kenny Golladay had something like 2 routes or something like that in the last game.
Yeah, he's dust. I think I was doing an underdog draft today, and I think Shepard at an ADP of 161 is maybe one of my favorite values. Look, like Tony probably gets more of a role. Wan'Dale Robinson will be back at some point, but I think at that cost, given what he's shown so far, and maybe even getting healthier throughout the year, I think Shepard's a pretty interesting add in your deep leagues for main event and other sort of season-long leagues, and also a pretty good value in the best ball resurrection.
So I do think that Sterling Shepard is the type of player where the efficiency versus target share is out. The efficiency, he's always going to be a low efficient guy over like a multiple, if you take an average of a couple of weeks. But at a pick of 160, you're getting like kind of close to a full-time guy who is commanding the target share that he normally does. It is a great pick. And the other thing about his 80 to 85, I guess he is a slot receiver, but he's also coming off a pretty recent Achilles injury. And so you could definitely think that as the season goes on and as he recovers further from that would go higher.
Yeah, that's my thesis for Shepard. I just think the price is so cheap that you're kind of lighting picks on fire in the 160s anyways. If you can get a guy who's been good before in the NFL and is currently leading his wide receiver room in opportunity, I think that makes some sense. I think we should touch on the Chiefs guys. You'll see Juju with just a 40%-ish weighted targets per route run. MVS even lower than that in the mid-30s from a weighted targets per route run perspective. I'll flip over the next chart quickly so we can see Mecole Hardman, who has a much higher weighted targets per route run at around 65%, but he is earning significantly less snaps than both of those guys. Sky Moore is not earning any snaps. It's actually Justin Watson as the wide receiver 4 there. So None of these guys have really popped up for big fantasy games so far. It's a tough one to read. Juju and MVS are earning more snaps, but earning less targets. McCole actually looks like the guy when he's on the field that Mahomes looks to get him the ball and does look pretty explosive out there. I know he also potentially got banged up last week, so that's something to monitor. I think at cost, I would probably go McCole and then Juju and then MVS, but it's a really tricky room. I don't want to be spending a lot to take a bet here when I get McCole for so cheap. I think there's some concern about Juju. He looked good in week 1, but last week looked like sort of the guy on the Steelers just getting really low ADOT targets, not doing a lot with them. I think the talent is in question there. And this is coming from someone who bought Juju a lot this offseason, but let's see what his price is now. It's still in the mid 50s. I am a little wary of that price given what Juju has shown so far. Do you have any thoughts on these KC wide receivers?
Yeah, so I know, obviously, I think we both listen to Sean Siegel. Everybody listens to Sean Siegel a lot. And one of the comments he was making in the run-up or during the offseason last year or this year was that Mahomes was getting cheaper, but all the wide receivers were getting more expensive. And one of the comments that the Chiefs have consistently made is, hey, it's going to be different guys on different weeks, and that's just the way that we want to play. And I think that when you hear that comment, I don't think a lot of people kind of like incorporated that. The base assumption was, okay, somebody is going to consolidate that work, and we just need to take kind of random shots across these guys and hope that it happens. And I think what we're seeing is that it doesn't look likely to consolidate.
No.
Just because you've got kind of like, you've got Travis Kelce, and then you've got kind of a lot of middling NFL talents at wide receiver. And it was very effective against the Cardinals and not quite as effective against the Chargers, which is a really strong defense. So the way I would look to play that situation, unless I thought there was somebody who really had a chance to consolidate, price sensitivity is the name of the game. And just to pull up some of these ADPs, I would be looking to make sure that other than Kelce, that I'm just making sure that I get prices where I can afford them to be a wide receiver by committee.
Yeah. So looking at the prices, Drico, we got Juju for just the wide receivers. We got Juju at 57, then a huge drop off to MVS at 111, then another huge drop off to Hardman at 138, and then Sky Moore at 141. So I am totally playing this through MVS, Hardman, and Sky. I think it doesn't make sense that Juju's price is so much higher than those guys based on what he's shown so far. Right. I do want to make the point on Sky that it's looked quite bad through 2 weeks, but the fact that none of these guys is really popping is a bit bullish for him, that maybe when he sees the field, he can emerge as a target earner. He clearly something's going on in practice where he hasn't shown that, but I'm leaving the light on for him and probably taking him at 141 just as a bet that these other guys, MVS, Juju, McCole, are not, going to be consolidators in the NFL for Mahomes this year.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think that Cole Hardman does look interesting as a guy. If he's going to be that cheap, and he plays for the Chiefs, he does have this kind of like defined role. But I do think that he probably is capped at this like 60% route share guy who I guess is not going to be terribly efficient when he's on the field, but does have some pretty solid touchdown, avenues. And that could be enough at that price.
Agreed. Okay, I think that was a good breakdown of the Chiefs. Let's move on to this last chart for the wide receivers. These are guys that are more rotational wide receivers in the 30 to 70% of routes run. What you will notice here is some guys who missed a week, Gabe Davis, Mike Pittman, their numbers are a bit skewed. I did not adjust for injury here. I would have had more time, but besides some of those guys who clearly disappear here because they missed a game, you see a lot of rotational wide receivers that are pretty interesting. For me, Drico, and then I'll let you give your thoughts. Clearly the most interesting to me here is the rookies, Burks and Garrett Wilson. I think those guys are going to be really hyped up. I'll let you go on about either of those guys if you want. But another guy I wanted to call attention to that's maybe going more under the radar is Ashton Dulin. He's only running 40 to 50% of routes, but isn't seeing an insane target rate on those routes. That could be just small sample variance for sure. That can definitely happen in these type of charts when you're looking at, just a handful of routes for these guys. But there really isn't a wide receiver 2 in Indianapolis that's really shown much in the NFL. They got Alec Pierce there, hasn't shown much. Paris Campbell can't really seem to do anything. So I do think there's a chance Dulin can emerge there as a clear wide receiver 2 and provide some value. But yeah, those are my key takeaways from this chart. I'll let you hit on Burks, Wilson, or anyone else that's jumping out here.
Yeah, I guess the only thing about Julian is that a big part of, and I know this is probably going to be true all year, a big part of his target share has just been that they just don't have anybody else other than Pittman.
And Pittman was also out last week when Dulin had a lot of targets, so worth noting that too. Yeah.
And the other thing as well is how bad Matt Ryan looks. Like,
oh man, awful.
And so I think it's pretty strong for Dulin that he had 3.2 yards per route run. And obviously with just this huge target share, but it does make me nervous how bad Matt Ryan looked and how bad the offense looked when they had to rely on Julian to that degree.
Agreed.
Other than that, I do think obviously this is just a hugely bullish symbol for Garrett Wilson and Treylon Burks.
Oh yeah,
those are players that we think are going to be, at least I think, are going to be underpriced in pretty much any format. Probably need to wait a week or two for DFS on Treylon Burks, but
agreed. Yeah, Burks and Wilson are both still going in the 90s. Just wanted to give that context on best ball resurrection ADP. So the market is not caught up to this insane usage and insane potential for these guys. But continue, Drico.
And just I guess on the resurrection point, these rookies, the resurrection is basically made for rookie receivers because the scoring doesn't start until week 6.
Yep.
And those are all the first 5 weeks is the weakest point for rookie wide receivers, and so anytime you kind of just have to try and get as many rookies as you can on rookie wide receivers as you can on your roster in that format.
Yep. Along those lines, I think another interesting thing that you'll see on this chart is the Packers wide receivers. They all appear as cardio specialists, meaning low weighted targets per route run and low fantasy points on a chart of rotational wide receivers. So that tells you something about this room right now. They're just kind of throwing shit at the wall with these wide receivers. They don't know who's good. None of them are really flashing much. But to your point of this best ball resurrection thing is made for rookie wide receivers, I am putting my chips in on Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs. I'm not sure either of them are good. They haven't really shown a whole lot yet, but they have shown more from a target earning perspective than Sammy Watkins and Randall Cobb and Alan Lazard. So, Yeah, it's gross for the Packers. If I'm Aaron Rodgers, I'm not sure why I re-signed in Green Bay for a year if this is the wide receiver room I was going to be given. But, someone here I think has to emerge out of this, worst quadrant on the worst chart that we're showing for wide receivers. Somebody has to do better than this. And I am going to bet on the rookies here at what I assume to be pretty low prices. We got Dobbs at 141 and Christian Watson at 156. You can put together a pretty damn cheap Packers stack, and hope you get lucky for a week or two in the best ball playoffs with some of those guys.
That makes sense. One question that we did get, it's probably a little bit longer, but I think it's an interesting. So how do we rank the rookie wide receivers? I think we're a bit short for time, so let's just do for the rest of the season.
Yeah, okay. For me, I think rookie wide receivers, I think London is the clear number one for me. Number two, I think I would go Burks. It's close between him and Wilson, but I'm just giving Burks the edge in a weaker wide receiver room, which with, I think, a better quarterback. I think once Zach Wilson comes back for the Jets, it could really hurt Garrett Wilson. So I'm going London, Burks, then Garrett Wilson. And then I think and then Olave, I think, is probably clearly fourth. And then I think a big tier break after that, I would then probably go Dotson. And then, yeah, I got to think through it more. But those are, I think, the NFL
right.
got it. I think the NFL got it right.
I agree there.
Yeah.
And so one thing that I'd be interested in, what do you think that efficient ADP would be for Drake, London, and Burks? So if you were going to, obviously we don't want to completely rank it. Would you take Drake London ahead of DJ Moore?
Oof. I think I would. I think yeah, I would, and it kind of hurts a little bit, but his role is a lot better. He was taken in the top, what was he? The top 10 pick in the NFL draft.
Right.
And I think more the situation in Carolina is a bit concerning. So I think that's very close, though. I'm not 100% confident in that, but what about you? What's your thoughts there?
I think I would. It doesn't feel comfortable, but I feel like I do think that Drake, the efficient ADP, and you're probably never going to have to draft him there. Efficient ADP probably is fourth round. For Burks, probably just a little bit behind, and probably like early fifth round. That makes sense to you?
I think that makes sense to me. And again, I want to rip more of these best ball resurrection drafts so I can really get my head around ADP. But that sounds fair. And I like, he has to earn a bigger role. And with the amount he's getting targeted when he's on the field, I mean, I think Vrabel is ultimately a smart coach. He might not do everything perfectly from what sort of analytics people want, but I think he's going to get his best player on the field in short order. So I think that sounds about right to me. I think an interesting way to think about, quick tangent on the best ball resurrection ADP. I think it's a little interesting to think of it from the perspective of, if we were doing drafts for next year, where would Drake London go based on these first two games? And I would say like third round if I had to draft today. And if you're taking that mindset, why shouldn't he go in the third round for the end of the season this year? Right. I think people are a little bit too anchored to preseason ADPs on certain guys. So I think London, based on what he's shown so far, he sort of deserves that third, fourth round ADP for sure. So I'm hammering him anywhere I can.
Yeah. And the point isn't like, oh yeah, we're drafting Drake London in the fourth. The point is, okay, this is what we're just trying to put a framework. Where should they be valued, right?
Yep, agreed. Let's finish with tight end here, Drico. You guys should be familiar with this chart from last week, but it's pretty simple. We're just showing tight end pass route percentage. So to be precise, we take the total number of dropbacks for the team. We see how many of those dropbacks are the tight ends running a route. That's a really important statistic, and that gets you your pass route percentage. Pass block percentage is the same thing on how many of the team's dropbacks are these guys staying in and pass blocking. So this chart here shows the high usage tight ends, guys who are getting more than 60% of routes run. I think we can cover this quickly. Drico, my main takeaway here, and let me zoom in on this chart a little bit just so we can see it better. I think there's a couple late round tight ends that look really good from a pure usage and also target earning standpoint. Tyler Higbee, Hayden Hurst, Evan Engram, Juwan Johnson, who was mostly undrafted. Those guys are all earning close to 80% or more of their team's routes, and they're earning solid targets while doing so. I think Evan Engram is potentially the most exciting there. We talked about how weak that wide receiver room was when we were talking about Robinson and ETN, but that applies to Engram as well. He has a weighted targets per route run of 53%, which would be strong even for a wide receiver. So, that's my big takeaway. I think Evan Engram and those other guys I mentioned are looking quite strong. And I'm not an expert on DFS. Drico, you probably have a better sense than me, but I would probably be playing guys like Engram and Hurst in DFS before they have a big game, because I think you can definitely see one coming in the future. Any thoughts there on those guys or anybody else in this chart that jumps out to you?
I think you may be one of the only people remaining who can get excited about Evan Engram.
He was good. He was good before he was bad. At some point, we thought he was good on the Giants, but then he dropped the ball 1,000 times.
It is important though that he is running that high route share. He is earning those targets, and that is super important. And definitely when you can get that at a great cost, it has to be interesting. I think it's super interesting that Mark Andrews at that kind of like, he's the highest route share guy with the highest target earning ability. Where is it? I think that has to be super interesting, and he's easily the shoe in to be the tight end 1 on the year, and the ADP has not really reacted. He's still gonna pick around 20.
Yeah, I was taking so much Andrews in the offseason, and I thought at one point, because I know sharp people were a little bit down on him, I was taking him in the late second almost every time, and he's still sitting there. I mean, he's like, we talk about Pitts as a wide receiver you can play at tight end. Mark Andrews actually is a wide receiver you can play at tight end. He has 0% pass block rate here. Like he's not a tight end, and I don't quite understand why Kelsey still goes so far ahead of him. Andrews is a younger player. He's running more routes. He's earning more targets. He's more explosive at this point of his career. I mean, Kelsey's a stud too. I'm not hating on Kelsey, but Andrews should be right up there with Kelsey in drafts. I'm totally with you on that.
And just a fun stat here is that he's only in line at 10% of the time.
Yeah, that's insane. He's a beast. I guess we should touch on Pitts. I think people
he's an important point, I think.
Yeah. So my takeaway from this chart is Pitts' role is fine. I've heard a lot about, he's being asked to pass block a lot. Okay, maybe it's a little bit more than we'd expect, but he's still, looking at this chart, he's running the 7th highest percentage of routes of any tight end. That role is totally fine in my book. What is not happening for him is earning targets. Only a 23% weighted targets per route run is quite low. I am willing to bet that's more small sample noise than a big concern for Pitts. Certainly, like, his ADP has fallen a little bit, and I think that's justified. But if he continues to slip, I think he's in the 40s now. I'm still in on Pitts. A lot of the things that we thought about him before the season are still true. He's a very talented player, high draft capital, got 1,000 yards as a rookie. I think the nature of the tight end position is there's going to be down weeks. If you look at Kelsey, Mark Andrews box scores from last year, you can find 2-catch, 20-yard games scattered in there. It's going to happen, but I'm not like full on panicking on Pitts as you seem to see on Twitter. And yeah, thoughts, Drico?
There's definitely some victory laps over the grave of Kyle Pitts, and I mean, honestly, the target stuff. If you had told me at the start of the year he would only earn 2 targets a game for the first 2 weeks, it's super disappointing.
Yeah,
but you do have to. I think you do have to make sure that you're using all the available information. Like, people treat it as if the last 2 games that we saw is the only information that we have. When that just you have to bring in all the other factors, like how good he was in college, how good of a tight end year he had last year as a rookie, which is kind of like a little bit unheard of. And the comments, this is probably a bit more of a stretch, but the comments of where Arthur Smith got asked, "Oh, hey, why isn't he getting more targets?" And it's like, I'm trying to win a real game here, not fantasy football. I think the backlash to that of like, what do you mean you're not using one of your best players when you're trying to win a game, is so strong. And the play where they lost the game on that pick to Bryan Edwards in triple coverage is so egregious that I almost wonder if they're forced to just go the other way of like, okay, this is embarrassing. Why aren't we using Kyle Pitts? And then maybe we do see some stronger target rate. But definitely at pick 40, I think with a talent like that at such a barren position, you really like it does seem like such a smash pick.
I agree with that. Let's finish up with the chart you've all been waiting for: rotational tight ends. So these are these guys are earning 30 to 60% of their routes run. It's funny you mentioned Noah Gray. That was my one of my big takeaways from the chart. I think this is more of a managed league point. I do think there's something to be said that Travis Kelce's backup tight end should be rostered, and I think it's pretty clearly Noah Gray from a pass catching perspective. He's running more routes than Fortson. Fortson doesn't even appear on this chart. I think he's closer to like 10 or 15% of routes. Noah Gray is up at around 40% of routes. Noah Gray also, small sample, but 55% weighted targets per route run. That's quite strong. So if you're in a managed league and you have an extra bench spot and need some tight end upside on your roster, say you're trotting out Dawson Knox and David Njoku or whoever it may be, I think Noah Gray makes sense as a stash in the same way that you would stash Alexander Mattison or Samaje Perine at running back. I think whoever steps into Travis Kelce's role would be a top 10 tight end, and maybe Noah Gray has some talent. So that's my Noah Gray take
on that. So as you know, I'm not a big managed guy, but one of the big things of the main event is the short bench and how much that really makes you think about. You really got to think about who are you using a roster spot on. Do you think that the main event kind of with the shorter bench, do you think he's still kind of a stash? Or do you think he's more of a, like, okay, some of these redraft leagues that would do on sleeper or something like that, and they've got a big bench. Is that where he's more interesting?
Yeah, I think I'm going to give a wishy-washy answer, but I think it depends. It depends where you need upside on your roster. If you're a 0 RB team and have Darren Waller as your starting tight end like we do, I'm going to be throwing my flyers at Chris Evans, Ronald Jones, like these third string running backs that may have some contingent value because I know we need upside at the running back position. I'm throwing my darts at those type of guys. If I have a roster where I punted tight end and I'm, maybe I drafted Gesicki, Irv Smith, some guys that have maybe disappointed so far, I do think in that scenario where maybe the rest of your roster looks quite strong and you say, hey, what really takes this roster over the top is an upside swing at tight end. I think guys like Noah Gray, Isaiah Likely is definitely another one I would 100% throw in that category. You can say the same thing that I said about Gray, about Likely, except he's even earning more routes and has an even more insane target share when he's on the field. So those are two guys, Isaiah Likely and Noah Gray, that in the FFPC main event, if I need upside at tight end, I am stashing them, if I feel good about running back and other positions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that does make sense for sure.
Yeah.
One question that we got, I see Eric Hove agrees with us about about Kyle Pitts. I've done a bunch of code drafts with him, very sharp guy. One question he had about us, and this your Mike Gesicki comment was like, "Oh, is he usable?" I think the problem for Gesicki, Mike Gesicki on the Dolphins, is that not only is he not getting the route share that we want, so he's there below a 60% route share, but in the wide receiver, in the wide receiver chart, we saw that Waddle and Tyreek Hill are earning such dominant, such huge target shares that a rotational sort of tight end, it's just so the tight end in that offense has to be 100% route guy almost, and then even then it's thin because those guys are taking up so much target share.
Yeah, totally agree on that point with Gesicki. I think he needs, I don't know, a Smythe injury or something to be usable, because right now he's splitting that role, and he'll definitely, I mean, if you're punting tight end, there are worse plays. We know he can be involved in the red zone. He has the speed to, take a route down the seam, and the Dolphins offense looks explosive. So if, you're asking me Mike Gesicki or Brevin Jordan or Mike Gesicki or Logan Thomas, I'd go Gesicki, but he's, pretty firmly in the tight end 2 discussion, I think, at this point. Cool. Well, I think that's, once you spent 10 minutes talking about Isaiah Likely and Noah Gray, it's a good time to wrap up the stream. But that was a ton of fun, guys. I'm glad we got to do the show live. I believe Drico and I will be trying to do this every Tuesday night at around 7 p.m. and be live for the Ship Chasing VIP members. So if you're not involved there, you can join the Ship Chasing Discord and be able to access these streams live. But yeah, the only other thing I'll plug, if you're interested in looking at these charts in more detail, one, I will post them in the Ship Chasing Discord in PDF form, so you can take a look at the charts and maybe get some insights from guys we didn't talk about. And you can also follow me at Sherman_FFB on Twitter, where I will be posting a weekly thread with these charts and my key takeaways. But yeah, Drico, anything you want to plug before we get out of here?
Obviously, subscribe to RotoViz, and that's where you get a lot of articles from Sean Siegel. I'm writing a column on the Battle Royale every week. I think that's a super fun format that more and more people are getting into. What's really cool about it is that it's like DFS, but nowhere near the time commitment. You don't have to skip brunch on Sunday morning if you don't want to. You can draft your teams during the week with the information that you get from your research, and it's a lot of fun to sweat. But I've been doing a lot of research, writing about the kind of strategy on it and how to take advantage of different strategic elements there. I'll probably be doing some podcasts soon with Colin Kelly on RotoViz. But those are my plugs.
Nice. Yeah, definitely got to check out those Battle Royales more. It sounds a ton of fun. But anyways, that was a lot of fun, guys. We'll see you back here next week.